Demonology and Devil Lore, Volume 1, Part 2, The Demon. Chapter 1, Hunger. Hunger demons. Kefin, Miru, Kagura, Rahu, the Hindu sun devourer. Rahu, the Hindu sun devourer. The earth monster, a Francosian custom. Shaitan as moon devourer. Hindu offerings to the dead. Ghoul, goblin, vampires. Leoness of demons. Leoness of demons. Old Scotch custom. The origin of sacrifices. In every part of the earth, man's first struggle was for his daily food. With only a rude implement of stone or bone, he had to get fish from the sea, bird from the air, beast from the forest. For ages, with such poor equipment, he had to wring a precarious livelihood from nature. He saw, too, every living form around him similarly trying to satisfy its hunger. There seemed to be a spirit of hunger abroad, and at the same time, there was such a resistance to man's satisfaction of his needs. The bird, the stony earth, so ready to give him a stone when he asked for bread, that he came to the conclusion that there must be invisible, voracious beings who wanted all good things for themselves. So the ancient world was haunted by a vast brood of hunger demons. There's an African tribe, the Karens, whose representation of the devil, Kefin, is a huge stomach floating through the air, and this repulsive image may be regarded as the type of nearly half the demons which have haunted the human imagination. This, too, with her daughters and slave, haunting the South Sea Islander. The esoteric doctrine of the priest was, the souls leave the body ere breath has quite gone, and travel to the edge of a cliff facing the setting sun, Ra. A large wave now approaches the base of the cliff, and a gigantic bua tree covered with fragrant blossoms springs up from Avaiki, netherworld, to receive on its far-reaching branches human spirits, who are mysteriously impelled to cluster on its limbs. When at length the mystic tree is covered with human spirits, it goes down with its living freight to the netherworld. Akanga, the slave of fearful Miru, mistress of the invisible world, infallibly catches all these unhappy spirits in his net and laves them to and fro in a lake. In these waters, the captive ghosts exhaust themselves by running about like fishes in the vain hope of escape. The net is pulled up, and the half-drowned spirits enter into the presence of dread Miru, who is ugliness personified. The secret of Miru's power over her intended victims is the kava root, Piper mysticum. A bowl of this drink is prepared for each visitor to the shades by her 4 lovely daughters. Stupefied with the draught, the unresisting victims are borne off to a mighty oven and cooked. Her dance-loving son and the attendants subsist exclusively on human spirits, decoyed to the netherworld and then cooked. The drinking cups of Miru are the skulls of her victims. She is called in song Miru the Ready, because her cheeks ever glow with the heat of the oven where her captives are cooked. As the surest way to Miru's oven is to die a natural death, one need not marvel at the Reverend Mr. Gill, who made these statements before the Anthropological Institute in London, February 8, 1876. Had heard many anecdotes of aged warriors, scarcely able to hold a spear, insisting on being led to the field of battle in the hope of gaining the house of the brave, as the South Sea paradise seems to consist in an eternal war dance, or in one island, in an eternal chewing of sugar cane. It is not unlikely that the aged seek violent death chiefly to avoid the oven. We have here a remarkable illustration of the distinguishing characteristic of the demon. Fearful as Miru is, it may be noted that there is not one gracious element of cruelty in her procedure. On the contrary, she even provides her victims with an anesthetic draught. Her prey is simply netted, washed, and cooked. As for man, are his animal inferiors. In one of the islands, Aitutaki, Miru is believed to resort to a device which is certainly terrible, namely, the contrivance that each soul entering the netherworld shall drink a bowl of living centipedes. But this is simply with the one end in view of appeasing her own pains of hunger. For the object and effect of the draught is to cause the souls to drown themselves, it being apparently only after entire death that they can be cooked and devoured by Miru and her household. Fortunately for the islanders, Miru is a transmundane sphere, and room is left for many a slip between her dreadful cup and the human life. The floating stomach Kepin is, however, not otherworldly. We see, however, a softened form of him in some other tribes. The Greenlanders, Finns, Lapps, conceived the idea that there is a large paunch demon which people could invoke to go and suck the cows or consume the hearts of their enemies. And the islanders have a superstition that some people can construct such a demon out of bones and transmute the milk or flesh of cattle into a supply of flesh and blood. A form of this kind is represented in the Japanese kagura, the favorite mask of January dancers and drum beaters seeking money. The kagura is in precise contrast with the pretas, CM, which, though 12 miles in height, are too thin to be seen, their mouths being so small as to render it impossible to satisfy their fearful hunger. The pot-bellies given to demons in Travancore and the blood sacrifices by which the natives propitiate them, concerning which a missionary naively remarks that even these heathen recognize, though in corrupted form, the great truth that without shedding of blood there is no remission of sins, refers to the hunger demon. They are the brood of Kali, girt round with human skulls. The expedition which went out to India to observe the last solar eclipse was incidentally the means of calling attention to a remarkable survival of the hunger demon astronomic phenomena. While the English observers were arranging their apparatus, the natives prepared a pile of brushwood, and so soon as the eclipse began, they set fire to this pile and began to shout and yell as they danced around it. Not less significant were the popular observances generally. There was a semi-holiday in honor of the eclipse. The knots were crowded with pious worshippers. No Hindu, it is thought, ought to do any work whatever during an eclipse, and there was a general tendency to prolong the holiday a little beyond the exact time when the shadow disappears, and indeed to prolong it throughout the day. All earthenware vessels used for cooking were broken, and all cooked food in the houses at the time of the eclipse was thrown out. It is regarded as a time of peculiar blessings, if taken in the right way, and of dread consequences to persons inclined to heterodoxy or neglect of the proper observances. Between 9 and 10 in the evening, 2 shocks of an earthquake occurred, the latter a rather unpleasant one, shaking the tables and doors in an uncomfortable fashion for several seconds. To the natives, it was no surprise. They believe firmly in the connection of eclipses and earthquakes. Especially notable is the breaking of their culinary utensils by the Hindus during an eclipse. In Copenhagen, there is a collection of the offered up to the god of their victory, in token of good faith, lest they should be suspected of any intention to use again what they have given away. For the same reason, the cup was offered, broken, with the liberation. The Northman felt himself in the presence of the Jotun giants, whose name Grimm identifies as the eaters. For the Hindu of today, the ceremonies appropriate at an eclipse, however important, have probably as little rational meaning as the occasional bellfire that lights up certain dark corners of Europe has for those who built it. But the traditional observances have come up from the childhood when the eclipse represented a demon devouring the sun, who was to have his attention called by outcries and prayers to the fact that if it was fire he needed, there was plenty on earth, and if food, he might have all in their houses, provided he would consent to satisfy his appetite with articles of food less important than the luminaries of heaven. Such is the shape now taken in India of the ancient myth of the eclipse, when at the churning of the ocean to find the nectar of immortality, a demon with dragon tail was tasting that nectar. The sun and moon told on him, but not until his head had become immortal, and it is this head of Rahu which seeks now to devour the informers, the sun and moon. Mythologically, too, this Rahu has been divided, for we shall hereafter trace the dragon tail of him to the Garden of Eden and in the Christian devil, whereas in India he has been improved for a vindictive to a merely voracious demon. The fires kindled by the Hindus to frighten Rahu on his latest appearance might have defeated the purpose of the expedition by the smoke it was sending up, had not two officers leaped upon the fire and scattered its fuel. But just about the time when these courageous gentlemen were trampling out the fires of superstition, whose smoke would obscure the vision of science, an event occurred in England which must be traced to the same ancient belief, the belief, namely, that when anything is apparently swallowed up, as the sun and moon by an eclipse, or a village by earthquake or flood, it have a hungry dragon, earthworm, or other monster. The Pelsall mine was flooded, and a large number of miners drowned. When the accident became known in the village, the woman went out with the families of the unfortunate men, and sat beside the mouth of the flooded pit, at the bottom of which the dead bodies yet remained. These women then yelled down the pit with voices very different from ordinary lamentation. They also refused unanimously to taste food of any kind, saying, when pressed to do so, that so long as they could refrain from eating, their husbands might still be spared to them. When finally one poor woman, driven by the pains of hunger, was observed to eat a crust of bread, the cries ceased, and the women, renouncing all hope, proceeded in silent procession to their homes in Pelsall. The Hindu people casting their food out of the window during an eclipse, the Pelsall wives refusing to eat when the mine is flooded, are acting by force of immemorial tradition, and so are doing unconsciously what the African woman does consciously when she surrounds the bed of her sick husband with rice and meat, and beseeches the demon to devour them instead of the man. To the same class of notions belong the old custom of trying to discover the body of one drowned by means of a loaf of bread with a candle stuck in it, which it was said would pause above the body, and the body might be made to appear by firing a gun over it. That is, the demon holding it would be frightened off. A variant, too, is the Persian custom of protecting a woman in parturition by spreading a table with a lamp at each corner with several kinds of fruits. 9. When Pennant made his Scottish tour, he found fully observed in the Highlands the ceremony of making the Beltane cake on the 1st of May, and dedicating its distributed fragments to birds and beasts of prey, with invocation to the dread being of whom they were the supposed agents to spare the herds. Demons especially love milk. The Lambton worm required 9 cows' milk daily, and Jerome mentions a diabolical baby which exhausted 6 nurses. The devil nominally inherits among the peasantry of Christendom the attributes of the demons which precede him. But it must be understood that in every case where mere voracity is ascribed to the devil, a primitive demon is meant. And of this fact, the superstitious peasant is dimly conscious. In Franconia, when a baker is about to put dough biscuits into an oven to be baked, he will first throw half a dozen of them into the fire, saying, "There, poor devil, those are for you." If pressed for an explanation, he will admit this fear, that, but for this offering, his biscuits are in danger of coming out burnt, but that the poor devil is not bad-hearted, only driven by his hunger to make mischief. The being he fears is, therefore, clearly not the devil at all, whose distinction is a love of wickedness for its own sake, but the half-starved, gobbling ghosts of whom in Christian countries devil has become the generic name. Of their sacrifices, grace before meat is a remnant. In Muslim countries, however, shaitan combines the demonic malignant veracities. During the late lunar eclipse, the inhabitants of Pera and Constantinople fired guns over their houses to drive Satan away from the moon. For whoever the foe, the Turk trusts in gunpowder. But superstitions representing Satan as a devourer are becoming rare. In the Church of Notre Dame at Halle, Belgium, the lectern shows a dragon attempting to swallow the Bible, which is supported on the back of an eagle. There is another, of much more formidable form, in which the hunger demon appears in demonology. The fondness for blood, so characteristic of supreme gods, was distributed as a special thirst through a large class of demons. In the legend of Ishtar, descending to Hades to seek some beloved one, she threatens if the door be not opened. "I will raise the dead to be devourers of the living. Upon the living shall the dead prey." This menace shows that the Chaldean and Babylonian belief in the vampire, called Akaharu in Assyrian, was fully developed at a very early date, although the hunger demon was very fully developed in India. It does not appear to have been at any time so cannibalistic, possibly because the natives were not great flesh-eaters. In some cases, indeed, we meet with the vampire's superstition, as in the story of Vikram and the vampire, and in the Tamil drama of Harichandra, where the frenzied Sandramati on to the race of elves, "I have killed thy child, in order that I might feed on its delicate flesh." Such expressions are rare enough to warrant superstition of their being importations. The Vatala's appetite is chiefly for corpses. The pure hungry demons of India, such as the Bhut, a dismal, ravenous ghost, dreaded to the moon wane of the month Kartik, October through November, was not supposed to devour man, but only man's food. The Hindu demons of this class may be explained by reference to the Shraddha, or oblation to ancestors, concerning which we read directions in the Manu Code. The ancestors of men are satisfied a whole month with tilla, rice, and sea, 2 months with fish and sea. The Manes say, "Oh, may that man be born in our line, who may give us milky food, with honey and pure butter, both on the 13th of the moon, and when the shadow of an elephant falls to the east." The bloodthirsty demons of India have pretty generally been caught up with Kali into higher symbolism, and their veracity systemized and sustained in sacrificial commutations. The popular belief in the southern part of that country is indicated by Professor Moncure Williams in a letter written from southern India, wherein he remarks that the devils alone require propitiation. It is generally a simple procedure, performed by offering of food or other articles supposed to be acceptable to disembodied beings. For example, when a certain European wants a terror to the district in which he lived, died in the south of India, the natives were in the constant habit of depositing brandy and cigars on his tomb to propitiate his spirit, supposed to roam about the neighborhood in a restless manner, and with evil proclivities. The very same was done to secure the good offices of the philanthropic spirit of a great European sportsman, who, when he was alive, delivered his district from the ravages of tigers. Indeed, all evil spirits are thought to be opposed by good ones, who, if duly propitiated, make it their business to guard the inhabitants of particular places from demonic intruders. Each district, and even every village, has its guardian genius, often called its mother. Such ideas as these are represented in Europe in some varieties of the kobold and the goblin. Though the goblin must, according to folk philosophy, be fed with nice food, it is not a deadly being. On the contrary, it is said the Gobelin tapestry derives its name because the secret of its colors was gained from these ghosts. Though Saint Torin expelled one from Evrex, he found it so polite that he would not send it to hell, and it still haunts the credulous there and at Cain, without being thought very formidable. The demon that lurks in graveyards is universal, and may have suggested cremation. In the East, it is represented mainly by such forms as the repulsive ghoul, which preys on dead bodies. But it has been developed in some strange way to the Slavonic phantom called vampire, whose peculiar fearfulness is that it represents the form in which any deceased person may reappear, not ghoul-like to batten on the dead, but to suck the blood of the living. This is perhaps the most now existing in the world. A people who still have in their dictionary such a word as miscreant, misbeliever, can hardly wonder that the priests of the Eastern Church fostered the popular belief that heretics at death changed into drinkers of the blood of the living. The Slavonic vampires have declined in England and America to be the ogres who smell the blood of an Englishman, but are rarely supposed to enjoy it. But it exposes the real ugliness of the pious superstitions, sometimes deemed pretty, that in proportion to the intensity of belief in supernaturalism, the people live in terror of the demons and go about seeking whom they may devour. In Russia, the watcher beside a corpse is armed with holy charms against attack from it at midnight. A vampire may be the soul of an outcast from the church, or one over whose corpse before burial a cat has leaped or a bird flown. It may be discovered in a graveyard by leading a black colt through. The animal will refuse to tread on the vampire's grave, and the body is taken out and stake driven through it, always by a single blow. A related class of demons are the heart devourers. They touch their victim with an aspen or other magical twig. The heart falls out, and is perhaps replaced by some baser one. Mr. Ralston mentions a Mazavian story in which a hero awakes with the heart of a hare and remains a coward even after. And the werewolf, in some respects closely related to the vampire, also pursues his ravages among the priest-ridden peasantry of the south and east. In Germany, though the more horrible forms of the superstition are rare, the Nachtseher is much dreaded. Even in various Protestant regions, it is thought safest that a cross should be set beside every grave to impede any demonic propensities that may take possession of the person interred, and where food is not still buried with the corpse to assuage any pains of hunger that may arise. A few grains of corn or rice are scattered upon it in reminiscence of the old custom. In Desdorf, it is believed that if money is not placed in the dead person's mouth at burial, he is likely to become a Nachtseher, and that the ghost will come forth in the form of a pig. It is considered a sure preventative of such a result to break the neck of the body. On one occasion, it is there related several persons of one family having died, the suspected corpse was exhumed and found to have eaten up its own grave clothes. Dr. Dreyer, an eminent physician of Chicago, Illinois, told me in 1875 that a case occurred in that city, wherein his personal knowledge, where the body of a woman who had died of consumption was taken out of the grave and the lungs burned. Under a belief that she was drawing after her into the grave some of her surviving relatives. In 1874, according to the Providence Journal, in the village of Peacedale, Rhode Island, U.S., Mr. William Rose dug up the body of his own daughter and burned her heart, under the belief that she was wasting away the lives of other members of his family. The characteristics of modern spiritualism appear to indicate that the superstitions have outgrown this ancient fear of ghostly malevolence. We're surrounded by civilization. It is very rare in the ancient world or in barbarous regions to find invocations for the return of the spirits of the dead. Mr. Taylor has quoted a beautiful dirge used by the Ho tribe of India, beginning, "We never scolded you, never wronged you. Come to us back." Venereal customs are very significant to the fear that spirits may return, and their dirges more in the vein of the Bodo of northeast India. "Take and eat. Heretofore you have eaten and drunk with us. You can do so no more. You were one of us. You can be so no longer. We come no more to you. Come to you, not to us." Even, says Mr. Taylor, in the lowest culture, we find flesh holding its own against spirit, and at higher stages the householder rides himself with little scruple of an unwelcomed inmate. The Greenlanders would carry the dead out of the window, not by the door, while an old woman, waving a firebrand behind, cried, "Peklerkpok." There is nothing more to be had here. The Hottentots remove the dead from the hut by an opening broken out on purpose to prevent him from finding the way back. The Siamese, with the same intention, break an opening through the house wall to carry the coffin through, and then hurry it at full speed thrice round the house. The Siberian shoe-washers clean a red-hot stone after the corpse is carried out, for an obstacle to bar the soul from coming back. So Brandenburg peasants pour out a pail of water at the door after the coffin to prevent the ghost from walking. The Pomeranian mourners, returning from the churchyard, leave behind the straw from the hearse, that the wandering soul may rest there and not come back so far as home. In nearly all the pictures of demons and devils, they are represented as very lean. The exceptions will be found generally in certain southern and tropical demons, which represent cloud or storm. Typhoon, for instance, and present a swollen or bloated appearance. No northern devil is fat. Shakespeare ascribes to Caesar a suspicion of leanness. Yond Causus hath a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous. When Antony defends Cassius, Caesar only replies, Would he were fatter. This mistrust of leanness is a reflection of all the hunger demons. It interprets the old saying that a devil, however fair in front, may be detected by hollowness, is usually so thin as to cast no shadow. Illustrations of the hunger demon and its survivals might be greatly multiplied, were it necessary. It need only, however, be mentioned that it is to this early and most universal conception of preternatural danger that the idea of sacrifice as well as of fasting must be ascribed. It is indeed too obvious to require extended demonstration that the notion of offering fruits and meat to an invisible being could only have originated in the belief that such being was hungry, how much the spiritualization of such offerings may have attended their continuance among enlightened peoples. In the evolution of purer deities, fire, the devouring element, was substituted for a coarser method of accepting sacrifices, and it became a sign of baser beings, such as the Assyrian Akkadu and the later Lamia, to consume dead bodies with their teeth. And this fire was the spiritual element in the idolatries whose objects were visible. But the original accent of sacrifice never left it. The Levitical law says, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is upon them, which is by the flanks, and the caul above the liver, with the kidneys, it shall he take away, and the priest shall burn them upon the altar. It is the food of the offering made by fire for a sweet Saviour. All the fat is the Lord's. It shall be a perpetual statute for your generations, throughout all your dwellings, that ye eat neither fat nor blood. We men shown as well as the wrath of Jehovah against the sons of Eli for eating the choice parts of the meats offered on his altar, as in that offering of tender infants to Moloch, which his priest denounced, or in Saturn devouring his children, whom Arian faith dethroned, and they all reappear as phantoms thinly veiled above the spotless lamb offered up on Calvary, the sacrificed Macaria blessed, the pierced heart of Mary. The beautiful boy Menosis must be sacrificed to save Thebes. The gods will not have aged in tough Creon, though a king in his place. Iphigenia, though herself saved from the refined palate of Archimedes' blood, becomes the priestess of human sacrifices. The human offering, deemed half divine, could alone at last satisfy the deity. Gathered in his side this sheaf of sacrificial knives, wedded in many lands and ages, and in his self-sacrifice, the hunger demon himself was made the victim. Theologians have been glad to rescue the first person of their Trinity from association with the bloodthirsty demons of barbarous ages by describing the sacrifice of Jesus as God himself, becoming the victim of an eternal law. But whatever may be said of this complex device, It is sufficient evidence that man's primitive demon, which personified his hunger, has ended with being consumed on his own altar. For though fasting is a survival of the same savage notion that man may secure benefits from invisible beings by leaving them the food, it is a practice which survives rather through the desire of limiting ascetic saints than because of any understood principle. The strange yet natural consummation adds depth of meaning to the legend of Odin being himself sacrificed in his disguise on the holy tree at Uppsala, where human victims were hung as offerings to him and to his rune in the Havamal. I know that I hung on a wind-rocked tree 9 whole nights with a spear wounded, and to Odin offered myself to myself.